You're watching Cheat Sheet Tales, where true stories of love, lie, and betrayal come to life. If you're enjoying these videos, don't just watch, hit that like button, it helps more than. Now. Let's get into today's story. I still remember the first time I saw Mark nod in the way a woman remembers a man she falls in love with, not with fireworks or instant feelings. Nothing like that. It was more like noticing a song you'd heard 100 times before, but suddenly it had different meaning, familiar, yet somehow different. Mark was my husband's oldest friend, practically family. And for a long time, that's all he was to me, just a friend of Jason's. Jason and I had been married for almost 8 years at the time we met in college. He was the charming, easygoing business major who made everyone laugh, and I was the quiet psychology student who never expected someone like him to look at someone like me, but he did. And when he did, it felt like something out of a dream. We built our life slowly after college. We got married in a small church in North Carolina with just a few close friends and family members. Jason got a job in real estate, and I started working as a school counselor. Our life was stable, predictable. There were rough patches like every marriage has, but overall, I thought we were doing okay. That is until I started noticing how lonely I actually felt. It crept in. Slowly first, a irritation, then sadness, then a kind of numbness. Jason was always busy. Real estate kept him on his phone constantly. He was either at showings, meeting clients on calls, or obsessively checking the housing market. We barely talked about anything beyond logistics, groceries, bill schedules. I can't even remember the last time he asked me how I was doing and waited for a real answer. I used to try to bring it up. I'd say, "I feel like we're drifting." And he'd nod, distracted, already mentally checking out. Once I even said, "Do you still love me the way you used to?" And he just stared at me like I'd asked him if he liked pineapple on pizza. "Of course I do." He said, "Why would you even ask that?" But there was no feeling behind it. No effort to dig deeper. It felt like I was the only one trying to hold us together. Then came the summer. Jason asked Mark to stay with us for a few weeks. Mark had just finalized a tough divorce and was relocating from Chicago to Raleigh. He needed a place to crash while he got his bearings and looked for a new apartment. Jason offered our guest room without even asking me first, but I didn't mind. I remembered Mark from the early years of our marriage, funny, thoughtful, a little more serious than Jason. But in a comforting way, he'd always treated me with quiet respect. Never flirted, never overstepped. When Mark showed up at our door with just a suitcase and a tired smile, something about him felt grounded. He wasn't like Jason, who breezed through life with charm and distraction. Mark had this calm energy, like he listened when people spoke, like he noticed things I wasn't looking for. Anything. I swear I was just starving for connection. At first, it was just small things. He'd ask how my day was, and he'd actually wait for an answer when I told him about a difficult student I was working with. He didn't just nod and move. When he asked questions, he remembered the kid's name the next day. When I made dinner, he'd insist on helping clean up, and when Jason was glued to his phone at the table, Mark would look up, make eye contact, and smile like he was really present. I didn't realize how much I missed being seen until I started feeling it again. One evening, Jason had a late meeting with a client, and it was just Mark and me at home. I were folding laundry in the living room when he came in with 2 cups of tea. He didn't say much, just handed me a mug and sat nearby. "Hard day?" he asked. I shrugged. They all kind of blur together. Now he didn't push, just sipped his tea and waited, and then, without meaning to, I found myself telling him everything, not about Jason, not directly, but about how I felt invisible lately, how I missed conversations that mattered, how tired I was of pretending everything was fine. He didn't offer solutions or try to fix it. He just listened. And that night when I went to bed, I felt something I hadn't felt in months. Not butterflies or romance, just a sense of being understood. Things carried on like that for a few more weeks. Jason was busy. Mark was helpful, kind, present. We never crossed a line, but I started looking forward to the moments when it was just the two of us. I'd linger in the kitchen a little longer. He'd offer to run errands with me, and I'd say yes. We were careful, but not careful enough to stop my heart from shifting. One night it all changed. Jason had flown out to Florida for a weekend conference. Mark and I were home alone, and a storm had knocked out the power. We lit candles, opened some wine, and sat on the porch watching the rain. I remember laughing a real full laugh I hadn't felt in ages, and then there was a silence, a long, waited pause. Mark looked at me differently that night. Not like a friend, Not even like a man seeing a woman more. Like someone seeing the truth for the first time and not knowing what to do with it. "I shouldn't say this," he said quietly. "But you don't seem very happy," my breath caught. I could have denied it, deflected, laughed it off. But I didn't. "I'm not," I admitted. "But I'm trying to be." He nodded, like he already knew. And then, very gently, he said, "You deserve more than just trying." That moment could have been the turning point, that could have been the line we crossed, but we didn't. He didn't touch me. I didn't lean in. We just sat there listening to the rain. Both of us, knowing something had shifted, but neither willing to name it after that. Things got harder. I was more aware of Mark, of the way he moved around the house, of how his presence made me feel. Jason, oblivious as ever, just kept running his showings and chasing commissions. He didn't notice that I was drifting. Maybe he did and didn't want to. See it one Saturday, I decided to do something about it. I told Jason we needed to talk. I told him I was feeling disconnected, unhappy, and unsure of where we were headed. He seemed surprised, then annoyed, then dismissive. "This again," he said. "What do you want me to do, quit my job and sit around talking about feelings?" "No," I said quietly. "I just want to feel like I matter to you. You do matter. But I'm working hard for us, for this life. But what if I don't want this life anymore?" That stopped him for a second. He looked at me like he was really seeing me. But then the wall went back up. "I don't have time for this drama, Elena," he said, standing up. "If you're unhappy, maybe you should figure out why, instead of blaming." That night, I cried in the bathroom. While the shower ran, I didn't want an affair. I didn't want to fall for someone else. I wanted my husband to care enough to fight for me, but he didn't. And Mark was there, steady, patient, kind. He moved out a few days later, said he found a place closer to work. We didn't say much when he left, just exchanged a long look at the door. But I knew what that look meant. It meant this isn't over, not really. And it wasn't. That was the beginning of something I never expected, something that would change my life in ways I couldn't undo. Not because I was looking for love or excitement, or even escape, but because I'd forgotten what it felt like to be seen. And once you remember, you can't forget. After moved out, I thought maybe the space would help clear my head. I convinced myself that things could go back to normal, that the feelings I had were temporary, just the result of emotional neglect and too much quiet in a two-house. But I was wrong. If anything, the silence got louder. Jason didn't notice the shift in me, not really. He seemed relieved that things weren't tense anymore, but he mistook my calm for contentment in reality. I had just shut down, stopped trying to talk about my feelings. I stopped asking for attention, affection, connection. I smiled when he walked through the door, cooked dinner, folded laundry, kept the house in order. But inside, I was slowly vanishing. Mark and I didn't talk for weeks after he moved out. I didn't have his new address and he hadn't reached out. I didn't blame him. It was probably the right thing to do, but I missed him terribly. Not in a romantic way. Not yet, at least. I missed the way he listened, the way he looked at me without judgment, the way I could be myself around him. I missed being heard. It was a Wednesday afternoon when he texted me, "Mark, hope you're okay. Just wanted to say, I've been thinking about you." It was simple, no expectation, no pressure, just a line that broke through the wall I'd been trying to build around myself. I stared at that message for a long time before replying me, "I'm okay. Sort of, I miss our talks." That was all it took, a small opening. And the flood began again. We started texting every few days. Nothing inappropriate, we kept it light, funny stories, updates on work, occasional photos of the dog he'd adopted. But underneath it all, there was a current, something unspoken that hummed between our words. One day, he asked if I wanted to grab coffee. I hesitated. I knew how it would look. I knew what it could lead to, but I also knew how much it needed to feel human again. So I said, yes. We met at a small cafe on the east side of town. It was raining. Again, funny how storms always seemed to find us when I walked in. Mark was already there, waiting at a corner table. He stood up when he saw me, just like he always used to, and I felt my chest tighten. He looked the same, comfortable, familiar, like home. We talked for over 2 hours about nothing and everything, workbooks, movies. But then toward the end, the conversation shifted. "Are you happy?" he asked gently, the same way he had that night on the porch. I didn't answer right away. I didn't need to. He already knew. I think I've forgotten how to be. I finally said, maybe I've just stopped. Maybe I've just stopped. believing it's something I deserve. Mark reached across the table and touched my hand just for a second, just enough to remind me that I was still there, still real, still alive that moment. The warmth of his hand, the honesty in his eyes were the beginning of the line we shouldn't have crossed. We didn't kiss that day. We didn't even hug, but something between us changed. The next time we met, a week later, it was the same cafe, then the park, then a bookstore. And each time, the conversations grew deeper, the silences heavier, the glances longer. I told myself I was just talking to a friend, but deep down, I knew I was lying. Jason had no idea he was caught up in some big development project and had started working weekends. He came home, late, exhausted, distracted. He never questioned where I'd been or who I was. He just assumed I was running, errands, or seeing friends. One evening, I came home from meeting Mark and found Jason asleep on the couch with his laptop still open. I stood there for a long moment looking at him, trying to remember what it felt like to love him the way I once did. It wasn't that he had become a bad person. He wasn't cruel or unfaithful or abusive. He was just absent, unreachable, like he'd given everything to his work and left. Nothing for me. I sat down quietly and covered him with a blanket, and then I went to bed alone. I wish I could say that was the night I made a decision, but it wasn't like that. It wasn't one big moment. It was 1,000 small ones, a slow, quiet unraveling. Mark never pressured me. He never asked me to leave. Jason never pushed for more. But every time we met, he made it harder to pretend I didn't want something more than just friendship. The day we finally crossed the line, it wasn't dramatic or passionate. It was gentle, painfully gentle. We were sitting in his car parked near a trail we used to walk. It was early evening, golden light spilling through the trees. We had just finished talking about nothing in particular, something about our favorite childhood movies, I think. And then he looked at me, really looked at me, and said, "You don't have to say anything, but I just need you to know I care about you deeply." I didn't respond with words. I couldn't. Just leaned forward and rested my head against his shoulder. We stayed like that for a long time. No kiss, no embrace, just a quiet moment of surrender. That night, I went home and stared at myself in the mirror. I didn't recognize the woman looking back at me, not because she had done something wrong, but because she had changed. She wasn't the same person who had walked down the aisle 8 years ago, full of hope and belief in forever. She was someone who'd lost herself along the way. I didn't sleep much. I kept thinking about Jason, about how I would tell him if I even could, about how I got to this point. Was it betrayal? If you were emotionally abandoned, first, was it wrong to want something more than just being roommates in a loveless marriage? I didn't have the answers. The guilt didn't come all at once. It came in waves when I watched Jason eat breakfast the next morning, oblivious to the storm inside me. When he kissed me on the forehead, distracted, Ash left for work. When I cleaned the kitchen and found the birthday card I wrote him last year, full of hope, I no longer felt. I started journaling again, something I hadn't done in years, writing down every thought, every fear, every memory of how things used to be. I found old photos from our honeymoon, Jason and me on the beach, laughing, sunburned, in love, and I cried because I missed that version of us, because I didn't know how we lost it, because I wasn't sure we could ever get it back. Mark and I never talked about the future. We never made plans. It was always just the next moment, the next conversation, the next walk. And yet I started imagining what life might look like if I were brave enough to start over. If I had the courage to let go. But letting go wasn't simple. It wasn't just about Jason. It was about the house we bought together, the memories we built, the people who knew us as a couple. It was about the life we'd shared and the pieces that couldn't be neatly divided. One evening, Jason and I went out to dinner, a rare thing lately I had made the reservation, hoping maybe we could really talk, but he spent most of the meal checking his phone. I finally said, "Can we just have one dinner without work?" He looked up confused. "I'm just answering a quick email." "I feel like I'm always competing with your phone," I said quietly. He sighed. "Eleanor, I'm trying to build something here for us, but we're not us anymore." I said, "You're building something, but I'm not even sure I'm part of it." That got his attention. "What's going on?" he asked, finally putting the phone down. And just like that, the moment had arrived, the moment I had been dreading and needing. I didn't tell him everything, not yet, but I told him enough. "I feel alone. I said, I feel like I've been alone for a long time. He looked stunned, hurt, maybe even scared. I had no idea, he whispered. I know, I said. That's part of the problem. He reached for my hand for the first time in months. Can we fix it? He asked. And I didn't know what to say because part of me wanted to believe we could, but another, the part that had come alive again, with Mark wasn't so sure the night. Jason asked me if we could fix it. I didn't have an answer, I told him. I needed time, and for once, he gave it to him, not just with words, but with his actions. He came home earlier, he asked questions, he started paying attention. It was like he realized maybe for the first time in years that he could actually lose me, and maybe he already had. I stopped seeing Mark after that conversation. Not because I didn't care about him, I did deeply, but because I needed to face my marriage with clear eyes. I owed Jason that I owed myself, that if I was going to leave it had to be because it was the right choice, not because someone else was waiting for me. Mark understood. He always did. His last words to me, at least for now, were, whatever happens, I want you to be happy. Just don't lose yourself again. It broke my heart, but I knew he was right. The following weeks were hard. Jason and I started going to therapy. We unpacked years of silence, of unspoken resentment, of missed chances. Some days were promising, even warm, others were painful and cold. There were moments I looked at him and saw a glimpse of the man I used to love, and moments I realized how far we drifted from each other. We were both trying, but we were also both tired. In one session, the therapist asked me if I still loved Jason. I sat there, stunned by the simplicity of the question. I think I love the memory of us, I said, but I don't know if that's enough. That night, Jason and I sat in the living room not speaking. The television was on, but neither of us was watching. Finally, it turned to him and said, I think we've both known for a while. He nodded, slowly, eyes glassy. I just didn't want to admit it. We didn't scream, we didn't argue, we just sat together in the quiet, holding the truth like something fragile. A month later, I moved into a small apartment across town. I kept some furniture, a few framed photos, my books. The rest I left behind, not out of spite, but because I needed a clean start. Haven't spoken to Mark since. Maybe I will one day, maybe I won't. What we had, whatever you want to call it, was real. But it also came out of a broken place. I don't want to start anything new. Until I've rebuilt myself. Some mornings, I still wake up and feel the ache of everything I lost. But more and more, I feel something else too, peace. Not the kind that comes from everything being perfect, but the kind that comes from finally being honest with myself, with Jason, with the life you want to live. This isn't the ending I imagined when I first said I do, but it's a beginning I chose, and sometimes that's even braver.